Guys, for leading us so beautifully. We've just been having some really wonderful times of worship, Sunday by Sunday, where we're gathering to sing, gathering to seek the Lord, and he feels like he really is meeting with his people. He's really moving amongst us. It's amazing to be a part of and amazing to see. But a massive welcome again. If you missed the first welcome, it's great to have you with us. If we haven't met before, my name's Colin, part of the clergy team here in the parish. And there's a couple of ways if you're exploring joining this church or finding a church in Dublin. There's some easy ways that you can find out more about us and figure out if this is a place that you want to call home as your church family. The first one of those is really simple. Head onto our website and sign up for our newsletter. We only communicate a little snippet of what happens in the life of the church here on a Sunday, but there's so much happening during the week and all around the city. So we would love to tell you more about that. To find out about all of those things, head to our website, scroll to the bottom and sign up to our newsletter. Each week we send out a little link on a Tuesday that tells you everything that's happening. So sign up to our newsletter if you are new. The second thing is you can fill in one of our Connect cards at the back. So down at the back near the front doors, there's little cards that you can fill in, and we'll get in touch and find out more about what's happening in the church. Or just grab any of us. Grab some of us at the front here at the service. We'd love to say hello and find out a little bit of your story and answer any questions of the church that you have here. Another thing to say is if you're here with any kids, most of them have gone out to their groups, but you need some space. The parent and baby room is open out through the doors to the right-hand side. Please feel free to grab some space in there anytime. And the sermon is going to be live streamed into there, so you can still follow along with what's happening in here. But we've got a couple of notices for you this morning, as is expected. September is upon us almost. The 31st September is upon us tomorrow. And with that brings a whole load of new things that are going to be kicking off in the life of the church. And the first one that I want to let you know of is from tomorrow. We are joining with 24/7 in a global week of prayer. So throughout the week, we are going to be praying together. There should be a slide for this. Next one up there, hopefully. Perfect. And so throughout the week, we are going to be setting some time aside to pray. And I'd love to encourage you to join us in this. There's a number of different ways that you can do this. Firstly, the really simple thing is just create some space in your day. Just set an alarm at 12 o'clock, lunchtime, whatever it might be. Just take some time, 5 minutes every day this week to pray. To pray for what God is putting on your heart, to pray for your family, to pray for your neighbors, to pray for the city, to pray that God would move afresh in and through us as a church. And so we're inviting the whole church just to start this academic year off by praying, knowing that we're joining with thousands of other Christians across the world. And to help us do that, some things that we're going to be doing. Firstly, I want to draw your attention to Wednesday night. We're going to be gathering here in the church for some worship and prayer together, crying out for God to move in our city in this time. And so I'd love to invite every one of you to come along to that here at 7:30 on Wednesday night. If you've never been to anything like this before, check it out. Come and give it a try. Nothing strange is going to happen. We're going to join together and we're going to pray. We're going to worship. We're going to seek God's face. So 7:30 on Wednesday, put that in your diary. The second thing to let you know is that we have just opened a new prayer room here in the church, which is going to be permanently open. Yes! And so we're going to be launching it this week. And you might have seen it whenever you're coming in. Chloe and Jacob have been working our way out there so much to make a beautiful space for each of us to book some time in. And so starting on the 8th, not this Monday, but the week after, that prayer room is going to be open every day from 9 till 12 and going to be open in Wednesday evenings. And you can book a slot, go in there. There's different activities, different prayer stations to help lead us in times of prayer. So on the 8th, that is going to be launching every day. But we have some slots this week, which you can find on our website. And you can book an hour, book a half an hour, come in, spend some time in there. And it's going to be a really useful place, hopefully, for us as a church to catalyze us to be a people of prayer. So the slots for this week, as you'll see on the left-hand side, Monday 12 to 2, Tuesday 7 to 8 p.m, Thursday 11 to 1, and Saturday 3 to 4. Take a picture of that and put some of those dates in your diary, those times in your diary this week, and join us for a time of prayer. The link to sign up for those is going to be in the newsletter. So if you need a chance or a reason to sign up for the newsletter. That's the perfect one. But this week, we're really focusing on prayer. So I want to invite everyone into that. And then I also just want to flag the date. In a couple of weeks' time, we have Rekindle on the 14th of September at 7:30 here in the church on Sunday evenings. And those are our monthly times of prayer and worship. So if you'd love to come along to that, it'd be great to have you. Put that date in your diary. We'll be talking more about that in the week to come. Another thing is, next Sunday afternoon, we have our annual back at school service. School kicked off this week. I was a new parent of a new junior infant. We are in the thick of it already. We're straight in. There's no going back. It is on this train now for a long time. But to start the new year and to wish our kids well and to pray them into the year, we're going to be having a service next Sunday at 3 o'clock here. And we're inviting all of our kids along, all of our parents, grandparents, teachers. If you know anyone, please do invite them along. It's a fun service where we celebrate, we play some games, we'll sing some songs, and there'll be a short talk just to celebrate our new year, to draw our kids in, to celebrate all that's happening and to pray for them. So put that in your diary. Next Sunday here at 3 o'clock in the church. The next one is Gather is back for all of the ladies in the room. Rebecca said she was going to do this notice, but she's not in the room, so I'm going to have to give it my best shot. But Gather is our women's ministry in the church here. She doesn't like it when I call women's ministry, so don't tell her I said that. Gather is an event for women in the church here where they focus on gathering at the table, gathering in His Word and gathering in His presence. They've had a couple of events already over the last year, and it's actually been amazing to watch from the outside that this body of women gathering together and really growing in faith together. So the next event for that is on the 4th of October. It's going to be a morning beginning at 10:30. So put that in your diaries. Rebecca will do a much better job in the weeks to come of telling you all about that. For the ladies in the room, put that in your diaries. The 4th of October. And the final, very quick one to say, is over the last number of months, we've been advertising in the church here for an operations assistant, and just wanted to bring the church in on that journey and say we're very glad that this week we offered that job to someone called Abby Garner, who's part of the church here. She's not with us today, but she's taken up that job, and so we'll be starting in the next week or two, and we'll introduce Abby to you. But do be praying for her, and if you know Abby, drop her a message. But that's really exciting, and thank you for those of you praying for that role, and we're really excited for the team going forward. But wanted to let the team know that also. Now, in a moment, we're going to take a break, and we're going to collect up our offering, and our older kids, you'll be able to grab some activities from the back before Mark comes and speaks. But before we do that, each week we say a little bit of liturgy together to remind ourselves why we give, and how we give is going to be on the screen. So why don't we say this little bit of liturgy together to recenter ourselves. Lord, everything we have comes from you, so we respond in worship by giving these gifts and our lives back to you for the glory of your name. Amen. And so if you're new or visiting, just let the baskets pass you by. But if you're part of the church and you want to give, please do give. And the baskets are all the ways to do that. It's on screen. But turn to the person beside you, ask them what they're excited for in September. And then in 2 minutes, we're going to come back together, and Mark is going to come and speak for us. Someone's got a message?
Good morning, everybody. Is that working? Can I interrupt your conversations? Welcome, everybody. It's very good to be up here this morning. My name's Mark Bubaya. Been coming here for a number of years. I'm a teacher, and so school is starting again. In fact, I'm not just a teacher. I actually run a school. I used to teach Latin and Greek, and I now run a school. Well, it's good to see everyone back here for the new term. Summer is sort of over, isn't it? September the 1st is really the beginning, in my mind, of autumn. But I hope you had a good summer. We certainly did. Most of July we were down in Cape Town visiting our daughter, who's settled down there. I used to run a school in South Africa. My wife grew up in Cape Town. So we had a good time down there. And then August, you go through times of life where you go to lots of weddings, like loads of weddings every summer. And then you go through a time of life where you go to no weddings. And then it sort of starts again, I think. We had 2 weddings. In fact, we got a third this year. We've been to 2 weddings. So August was a wedding month. One over in the UK. A cousin of mine was getting remarried. And then last Friday, a week ago, we were at the wedding of a colleague at school up in Donegal with a lot of the teaching staff there, which was quite fun. The low point of the summer came on the morning of that wedding, actually, because in our household, I do the ironing. And I wanted to run an iron over my shirt. So I said to Kathy, "You want me to run an iron over your dress?" This was a dress that had been very lovingly chosen in Johannesburg, actually. It was someone else's iron. And there are 3 dots for the hottest and the 1 dot for the coolest. And I was trying to work out, is that the hottest? Is that the coolest? And eventually I thought, yes, that's the cold setting. So I spread the dress out and I put the iron on top of it, and it literally melted. It literally fell apart, and it was like, this was not a good moment. Luckily, the wedding was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In the meantime, I had to get the Leaving Cert results from the school. But it's amazing. We got another dress that morning in Derry. We went and got another dress. It's amazing what you can get for €25 in Derry. And Kathy looked wonderful. I like a good wedding. I'm sure we all do. But perhaps like you, I'm slightly nervous before the best man's speech. And sometimes you hear stories of speeches that are totally inappropriate. Happily, last Friday, the speeches were excellent. And the best man got it absolutely right. Unfortunately, at my cousin's wedding a month ago, the best man thought that he was the main attraction. And he got it totally wrong, to the extent that everyone was embarrassed and some were furious. I won't go into the details, but we've all either heard or heard of examples of the best man telling totally awkward stories about past girlfriends and drunken escapades. It is not the job of the best man to be the main attraction. His job is to make sure that all the attention is given to the newly married couple and make sure that they can enjoy the occasion without having to worry about any of the logistics. Nothing at all should take away from the focus on the bride and the groom. And in some ways, the entire story of the New Testament is that of a wedding. That of the groom, Jesus, to his bride, the church. I wonder if you've ever thought of it like that. And John, the beloved disciple, in his vision in Revelation, uses the metaphor of a wedding as the culmination of the story of redemption. I'm meant to be clicking, aren't I? I forgot about that. Yeah, sorry, that was the title of the talk up there. Sorry about that, I forgot about the clicker. And he says, oh, sorry, there's a passage to read as well. Oh my goodness. Right, let's read Let's read the passage before I get... Sorry about that. Let's read the passage. Look, here it is. Okay, in fact, I haven't got it in front of me, so I'm going to read it from the screen. If it's rather small, it's obviously Matthew 11, verses 2 to 14. When John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Then what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, "I will send my messenger ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you." Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence, and violent people have been raiding it. For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John. And if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. And to go back to where I was about to say that John, in his revelation, in his vision that we hear about in Revelation, says, "I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband." That in itself is another sermon, but it's fair to say that John the Baptist provides the perfect role model for the role of the best man, pointing the Jewish people to the forthcoming wedding. And he makes a big song and dance about the groom to such an extent that some people actually begin to wonder whether he himself might be the groom. And then, having made his best man's speech, he fades away into the background in order not to distract attention from the leading characters in the wedding that is going to take place. His job was done. Unlike at my cousin's wedding, John, the best man, knew that he was not the big story. John 1 says, "There came a man who was sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light. He came as a witness to the light." He himself was not the groom. He was the best man, if you have it, if you like. Now let's get some context out of the way, for we know a lot more about John than we do about any other contemporary of Jesus. John is Jesus' cousin. He leaps in his mother's womb when his mother Elizabeth hears of the conception of Christ from her cousin Mary. John prepares the way for Jesus' ministry, calling the people to repent, setting the country alight with the anticipation of revival. There's an electricity in the air. Imagine how exciting it must have been for the disillusioned and oppressed Jewish people to sense that the Messiah was finally at hand. John says that though he's baptizing with water, there's one coming after him, the laces of whose shoes he's not worthy to untie. He's baptizing with water, but the one who comes after him is going to baptize with fire. Wow. Imagine hearing that for the first time. And when Jesus comes to be baptized, John calls Jesus out as the Lamb of God, the sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice of God. And having completed his job, that of the best man for the bridegroom, he tells his own disciples to go and follow Jesus. Having fulfilled his mandate, he says with extraordinary humility, "He must become more, and I must become less." That's one of the great verses of the Bible, and something we should all aspire to. He must become more, and I must become less. And after that, we don't see much more of him, but we are told that at some point he confronts King Herod and tells him that his relationship with his wife is out of order. That was not a percentage move. A bit like an Irish rugby supporter putting money on Ireland to reach the semi-final of the Rugby World Cup. not a percentage move. John was clearly more concerned for the truth than he was for his own safety. He was an uncomfortable and fiery character. I don't think he would have made an easy wedding guest. He certainly wouldn't have been impressed with smoked salmon and champagne, and he would not have dressed up or had a haircut. He would definitely have been on the no secco, but as far as I'm concerned, he would be welcome to it. In many ways, I don't find John easy to relate to. I've never eaten locusts, and I certainly don't need to tie my hair back. Incidentally, John was a Nazarite who from birth was not allowed to cut his hair or touch alcohol. I'm not sure what the opposite of that is. It would be someone who has no hair and does like a bit of alcohol. Not sure what the name of that is, but we can ask Tony afterwards what it's called. Yet despite all this, I find myself drawn to John. And coming back to the episode in his life that I read earlier, which is told by both Luke and Matthew in their gospel accounts, we have this remarkable story of John, the forerunner, the cousin of Jesus, sending his disciples to check on Jesus and ask him, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" What's going on here? I've read that the early church fathers thought that John could not possibly have had any doubts of his own, and interpreted this as John sending his disciples to Jesus to strengthen their own faith and not to reassure him. But why shouldn't he have had moments of doubt? Abraham had doubts. He was prone to telling lies. Moses had doubts. David was an adulterer and a murderer, despite being a man after God's own heart. And Elijah was prone to despair, if not depression. So why not John? Despite his locusts and wild honey and animal skins and lack of personal hygiene, I also see here a man like the rest of us, uncertain, in need of reassurance, and confused by the conflicting reports that he's hearing. And of course, he feels abandoned, languishing in jail. I don't relate very easily to John's hairstyle, unlike perhaps Jonathan over there can. Although, Jonathan, you weren't listening there. I was making a joke about, sorry. I said he was talking. He was talking during the sermon. Can you believe that? I'll start again. I can't relate to his hairstyle in the way that Jonathan over there can. Although I was going to say, now that he's under new management, the hair is a little bit more under control. And I can't relate to his clothing or his diet, but I can relate to his need of reassurance, and I find it strangely comforting. Let's look at John's predicament. As I said earlier, John has confronted the king regarding his immoral relationship with his brother's wife. He's been thrown into prison, which did not mean an exercise yard and a free TV and 24-hour internet. It would have been brutal. And you can imagine the fake news that he's hearing. Now remember that John is a fiery Old Testament sort of figure who was not averse to calling a spade, and yet he's being told that Jesus has turned water into wine, and a lot of it. He's consorting with prostitutes, touching the unclean, going to parties with tax collectors. Come on, Jesus. Where's the fire and brimstone? The condemning of sinners, the rage against the system. Of course, John is a strong character, but it seems that he's also human and prone to the same vulnerabilities and uncertainties that we all are. And the question arises in his mind as he languishes in his prison cell. Is this Jesus who I thought he was? Or have I made a mistake? This cousin of mine seems a bit wet and woolly. Have I misread him? So in confusion, he sends some of his followers, with whom he clearly has some contact still, to ask the question, that extraordinary question, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? And once again, I sense some tension in the air. He wants to check on Jesus' credentials and make sure that he is actually the fulfillment of the Old Testament, the Messiah who was to come, because some of what he's heard has left him confused. And Jesus doesn't just say, yes, just doesn't give him a sort of thumbs up emoji, which wouldn't be much good because I'm sure John would never have carried a phone. But that wouldn't have been easy and not so convincing. He could have said, sure, I'm the Messiah. Got a problem with that? Hey, cousin John, you know me. Lamb of God, right? Everything will be fine. He could have done those things, but he makes it clear that he is indeed fulfilling all that was said about the Messiah in the Old Testament. Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. We don't get to find out John's reaction to this. The next time we see him, his head is detached from the rest of his body. But this would undoubtedly have comforted him in his despair, for John would have known that these things were all those that the Messiah was expected to do. And is it too much to imagine John thinking, so he is the one, and he is fulfilling the Old Testament, and he is the Messiah who is to come. But he's also full of love for those who are suffering and broken. He's come to minister to the sick and not to those who have need of a doctor. And I wonder whether this was also a moment of revelation for John too. A realization that Jesus was combining the expected signs of the long-awaited Messiah with a demonstration of grace, mercy, and forgiveness for the sinner in a way that not even John, with his old covenant mindset, had grasped. Are we seeing here perhaps the man who was the bridge between the old and the new, the man of the Old Testament, grasping the truth of the gospel as if through a glass darkly, and understanding that the good news was even better than he had possibly thought it could be? And because John is, in some ways, that bridge between the New and the Old Testaments, there is understandably, some confusion. John didn't live to see the sacrifice of his cousin on the cross or the triumph of the empty tomb. He may have had some understanding of what was to come, but Jesus actually says that compared to him, we are all in a more privileged position. Truly, I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist, yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. All human beings are born of woman, but we who live in a post-cross and resurrection world are also able to experience a second birth. Hence our privileged position vis-à-vis John. For despite his extraordinary role in the drama of the gospel narrative, his understanding was incomplete. Now I want to move from looking at John to looking at ourselves and suggest that John's experience may be that of many of us today. Look at it like this. Perhaps you've had a genuine experience of the saving, forgiving power of the gospel. You've even pointed people to the Lamb. Behold, the Lamb of God. And you have had no doubts at all about the person of Jesus, who was one of my favorite verses, confirming the divinity of Christ from the book of Hebrews. The writer says, the Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. You've been there. And you've had the mountaintop experience with the chosen disciples. Is that you? And you thought that you could stay there forever. But then life in the valley has not been as smooth as you hoped. When is it ever? And you found yourself in prison. You've become confused and you've started to ask yourself that question. Is he really the one who is to come? Of course, not many of us will experience real prison, But many people do experience the prison of addiction, of doubt, of disappointment, of fear. Lord, I've given up everything for you. I don't understand why I got cancer. Lord, I've tried to honor you, but why have I had to flee my country? Lord, I try to honor you in the way that I work and live, but why am I struggling so much financially? And why can't I get the kind of job that I really want? Lord, I'd love to get married, but I find relationships really hard. Or why am I divorced? Or why can't we have children? Lord, I try to honor you in the way that I live my life, but I find I'm addicted to pornography, and I feel ashamed about it. Lord, I know I should feel joyful and fulfilled in my faith, but if I'm honest, I find it a struggle, and I feel guilty. God must find me a great disappointment. Do you relate to any of those? Because let's face it, we're all John. Every single one of us has said to ourselves at some point, is Jesus the one who is to come? Is Jesus really the only way? Are you really the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Or maybe he's just one of many. Or maybe the love and forgiveness that I found when I first came to faith was a mirage. Or maybe we don't reject the gospel, but we settle for a thimbleful of it, rather than the living, flowing torrent of water that Jesus promised to a 5 times married woman who was a heretic, whom he asked for a drink, and which he also offers to each one of us. Is Jesus the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Is the grace that he offers really for me, despite all that I've done? Is his love for me really unconditional after I've let him down so often? Are my sins really forgiven by his sacrifice on the cross? Don't I need to keep proving myself again and again? Perhaps grace is too simplistic, and it's simpler and easier to return to the law. And like John the Baptist languishing in despair in his prison cell, we find ourselves back in an Old Testament way of thinking. I wonder whether you've ever had that thought in your mind. Wouldn't it be simpler if Jesus had just condemned the sinners and laid down the law? Why can't we just avoid the sinners and hang around with the good guys all the time? Why is it the sinners so often seem to get away with it? I wonder if you've ever said with the writer of Psalm 73, I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles and are free from human burdens. Surely in vain have I kept my heart pure. Have you ever said that? What am I doing this for? Who am I kidding? Where has it got me? John didn't know the full story of the gospel, but we do. But we have all known that age-old temptation, I think, when times are tough, to slip back into a religion of the law, of rules, of trying to measure up to an impossible benchmark. Grace is uncomfortable. It's difficult to accept. It's unfair. The law is fair because sinners get what they deserve. I can understand the law. Grace is another matter. I can't control it. I read recently an article written after an interview with a modern-day prophet by the name of Maro Itoje, who has, I'm told, recently become more committed to his Christian faith. I got a picture of him in his England shirt rather than his Lions shirt there, just to be provocative. Asked about, a serious point to make though, asked about what it meant for him to be the captain of the British and Irish Lions, he replied that rugby and captaining the Irish and British and Irish Lions and England, the pinnacle of any rugby career, was not who he was. Rugby was what he did, but it was not who he was. And that's more profound than it first appears. For how quick we are to define people by what they do for a career, by how successful they have been and not by who they are. All right, if you're head of Pioneer Ministry, that's a different matter. That's different level stuff. But actually, Rob Jones is not defined by being head of Pioneer Ministry. He's defined by being a husband and a father and a friend and a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm not defined by running the most expensive school in Ireland. Very, very good value nonetheless. Talk to me afterwards if you'd like to. I'm defined by my relationships and where my center is and who I follow. I wonder if you've ever been in a social gathering and someone walks past and the person you're talking to leans over in a whisper and says, "That's so-and-so. He or she's been incredibly successful, started 10 businesses, sold them at the top of the market, retired age 40. And you're meant to be in awe of them, the living example of success, and you're meant to stare after them in admiration and envy. But then you find out that he's just divorcing his third wife and his children no longer speak to him. What is success? God is not interested in your CV. He's interested in your character. He wants to know where you put your trust, not how many followers you have on Instagram or what your property portfolio is worth. I run a school, as I think I've told you, and I would be lying if I pretended that I don't care what exam results we got last week. They were actually very good, but don't worry about that. That's not the important point. But frankly, in the bigger scheme of things, no one cares what your exam results are. I would much prefer people to say of children who go to my school that they come out with the right values and the right faith and the right center in their lives. Any pupils from my school who happen to be listening here this morning, you need to work hard as well. I think there is a temptation in all of us when things are difficult to move from the new covenant back to the old one, to abandon the gospel of grace and return to the simplicity of the law. We retreat back into the lies that tell us that God's love for us is conditional, that he would love us more if we could only be stronger and not so weak and prone to give in to temptation. But do you know something? God doesn't want you to be strong. He wants you to be weak. He can only use us when we're weak. It's only when we acknowledge our weakness that we will throw ourselves on his love and mercy. It's only when we know our weakness that we will rely fully on his grace. One of my favorite poems is by Edward Shillito. It's called The Jesus of the Scars. It's not the best poetry, but I love the sentiments of it. He wrote it in the trenches during World War I. This is the final verse. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds only God's wounds can speak, and not a God has wounds, but thou alone. When Jesus appeared to his disciples after his resurrection, he'd been through death and emerged victorious. His perfect resurrected body was not spotless, but still bore the scars of his sacrifice. Jesus' scars are his glory and not his shame. I wonder if there's anyone here this morning who feels they're in that dungeon, feeling a disappointment to yourself and a disappointment to God, aware of your weakness and your shortcomings. Well, take heart. That's not a bad place to start. In fact, it's the only place to start. And if you're here this morning and you think you've got it all together, then good for you. But Jesus can't help you. Be assured, he welcomes the doubter and the confused. He welcomes the weak and the weary. He welcomes the disappointed and the fearful. He doesn't need you to get your life sorted before he welcomes you. He wants you to come as you are right now. And if you found yourself asking, are you the one who was to come, or should we expect someone else? Don't feel guilty about that. You're in good company. Know that the answer has not changed since those disciples of John came back to tell him what they had seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. Let's stand. Lord, if anyone here is feeling weak this morning, or disappointed, or sad, fearful, doubtful, that's great. That's the place to start. It's the only place to start. Help us to realize, each one of us, that it's only when we realize our weakness before you that we can throw ourselves into the loving arms of a Father who is full of grace and truth. Amen.